New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs is facing a possible rebellion in his caucus after the government announced changes to LGBTQ policy in schools. It aims to dictate when a student is allowed to change their name or pronoun without parental consent. In response, 6 ministers and 2 backbenchers refused to sit this morning in the legislature. Here's what the Premier had to say.
But we're taking a strong position for families and working with children in a new and a constructive way to help them through very vulnerable years. And we know there are vulnerable kids that need extra help and assistance, and we think parents should be part of that. It potentially could force an election. That's a possibility.
It's a possibility. Would you do that?
Would I do that? It's not without the realm of possibility. I believe that strongly in the case of finding a solution here where we do not exclude parents in their child's life.
Jacques Poitras is CBC New Brunswick's provincial affairs reporter. We've reached him in Fredericton. Jacques, that was you there asking the question, would you do that? Is Premier Higgs, he's threatening this over the so-called Policy 713. Do you think it will come to an election?
Well, it did not come today. Let me tell you what happened. These 8 MLAs and ministers put out this statement and didn't show up for the House this morning. And this afternoon, there was a bill scheduled to be voted on from the opposition, from the Green Party, to ban fracking and shale gas development in New Brunswick. This is an issue that's close to the Premier's heart. And if 8 members were sitting out his caucus, the government would lose that vote, the bill would advance. Well, in the end, we don't know what happened, but the ministers and the MLAs did show up and they did vote down the bill. But there's several days left before they break for the summer and several more bills to come in the next week.
Okay, so he seems to have avoided that, but what is he trying to change in this policy?
Well, the words are very important in this policy, and one of the key elements in the existing policy that this government adopted just a couple of years ago says that kids in school, including kids under 16, can adopt a new name and pronoun at school within the classroom environment without their parents being told. Now, everything the Premier's been saying for the last 3 weeks implied that that was going to go. When we look at the new wording today, it seems to be that it allows for circumstances to continue where parents would not be told. But on the other hand, there's wording that's been taken out that would suggest that teachers are not going to be obligated or as obligated to respect those choice of names and pronouns. So we're still sort of parsing the wording to try to figure out exactly how this will all shake down. But the LGBTQ plus community is seeing it as weakening the policy.
Okay, so concern over the policy, internal concern over how this happened with 6 ministers and 2 backbenchers refusing to sit this morning in the legislature. Today's crisis, maybe not completely boiling over, but what the heck happens next with something like this?
Well, if you look at the statement by the 8 members, including 6 ministers, these are core ministers. These are ministers responsible for housing, for local government, these are the competent ministers that keep this government running. They didn't actually mention the policy, so this was the tipping point, but they talk about a lack of transparency and a lack of process. There have been problems within this caucus for quite some time, and I'm not sure that whatever happened today is the end of this, because the frustrations go beyond one issue. So we will see. There's an election due in November 2024. A lot of questions about whether the Premier will stick around for it, and that is all in the mix as well.
But Jacques, just as a final question, if these are the ministers that keep things running, as you say, and they're frustrated enough to do this, even if it doesn't cause an election maybe today, I mean, what does this tell us about the security of Blaine Higgs' premiership, his leadership of the party?
Well, there's no indication he would go quietly if he'll go if he doesn't want to. But this has been a question that's been hanging over him for a year or two, because he's going to be 69 years old. He is 69 years old this year, and he certainly has a very hands-on style of management that has created some turmoil with some ministers at different times. One quit last October over something. So we will see, but I don't think the end of the story is written yet on this. Okay, Jacques, thank you so much. This is CBC's Jacques Poitras in Fredericton, New Brunswick.
For more on this story, we've reached Gail Costello. She was a teacher for over 30 years and is now the co-chair of Pride in Education. She also played a role in establishing the original policy, and she joins me now. Gail, it's good to speak with you.
Good to speak with you too.
From your experience, how will these changes to the policy affect students?
I know they've been talking the past few weeks about how they were going to strengthen this policy, but by far this has weakened this policy. I think it's going to put students in a really vulnerable position. Before, students were very comfortable in schools, around their friends and around teachers, coming up to teachers and saying, you know, this is my preferred name or this is my preferred pronoun. I think there's going to be a lot of distrust now. The policy is going to push kids in the closet more than they have been in many, many, many years, and it's going to just put them in harm's way.
How many kids do you think might be affected by this, Gail? Have you got a sense of how big the population is that could be affected by this policy?
Not exactly. You know, if you look at the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, it's not just trans kids or non-binary kids that use pronouns or sometimes use different names. And if you look at the stats on that, you know, they often say around 10%, but in New Brunswick schools, they just did a student survey and the numbers seem to be extremely high of kids who identified as part of the community or non-binary at around 21%.
Right. Okay, that's a bigger number than you see in a lot of the data on this. So that's an interesting thing to note. I wonder, though, it's only been about a year and a half since this original policy was introduced. Why do you think they decided to review it and make changes so soon?
So what we've learned is that when this policy was released about a year and a half ago, Premier Higgs was not in favor of it at that time. And at the time, the Minister of Education, Dominic Hardy, signed off on it and it went out to the public. And I just believe that it's been a personal bias since that time that Premier Higgs has been trying to revoke this policy or make changes to it. And like I said, they keep calling it strengthening it, but what they definitely have not strengthened it. All along, they kept talking about affirming parents' rights. And so they may have strengthened it from a parent's point of view, but they certainly have not strengthened it from a child's point of view or a kid's point of view.
It seems to have sparked a bit of a caucus revolt for Premier Higgs. If he drove this personally, as you suggest, and certainly their actions seem to validate that, I mean, do you think he can hold his ground in the face of sort of the political pushback he's getting already from his own team?
I'm not sure. We've been hearing rumblings for the past week or so of certain MLAs who were speaking out and who, you know, behind the scenes were talking about not being happy with this. And I can't imagine that they are happy with it. Yesterday, the Premier and Minister Hogan announced that they had full caucus support, that everybody supported them 100%. And then several MLAs came out after that saying that they had never laid eyes on it, that the Premier had made had announced to them that they had made changes, but would not allow anybody to see it. So I can't imagine being part of a political party where they don't even trust you to see the policy changes that are being made and then go public and speak for you and say that you are in 100% agreement.
You know, this is a New Brunswick specific policy, but, you know, things get copied and they move across the country. Do you have any sense of whether you think other provinces might follow suit on this, or is this something that's contained to New Brunswick, you think?
No, I think we are in a really front position here. I know that people have been watching across Canada. It's kind of like the Florida situation. Once things started happening in Florida, then other states picked it up and started revoking human rights. And this has been a big concern of ours. And as much as, you know, the Conservative Party thinks that they have strengthened this and made this policy stronger, they haven't. And we know that the eyes of Canada have been on us, and it definitely is not stronger. I believe they've put the kids in a bit of a blackmail situation. Anybody under the age of 16 now who wants to use pronouns or a different name. Um, Teachers are not supposed to do that. And the policy is very confusing now. The policy was not confusing before, although they claimed it was, but now it's extremely confusing because this morning, Minister Hogan had a press conference and read off all the changes and had discussions with reporters and answered several questions. And then when we actually printed off the policy and looked at it, many of the things that he discussed are not in the policy. If you compare the policy from yesterday to today, they're virtually exactly the same, except a few things that are missing. And some of those missing points are very key. They change the intention of the entire section of that part of the policy, but certainly more confusing.
I want to just jump in with one last question, if I can, because we're just getting a bit
Okay.
tight on time. But obviously, the explicit direction of the old policy is gone. It's a grayer sort of area that creates the confusion that you sort of walk through. What's your advice to any student who's maybe put in a difficult situation because of these changes?
Well, first of all, they can't force you to go to counseling. It's very 1970s-ish to act like there's something wrong with these kids. There's nothing wrong with them. They don't need professional counseling, and they don't have to come out if they don't want to. So this is the blackmail situation that I'm talking about, in that they're saying that teachers will not be able to use their preferred pronouns or names unless they go to counseling and get counseled to come out to their parents. Well, students do have rights, and I would just tell students to stick to your guns. You do not have to go to counseling, and you can use pronouns and preferred names when you want. Teachers will support you. They've been doing it for a long time, and I trust that they will continue to do so.